It started in a way no one would ever call special. There was no music playing at the right time, no dramatic moment, no feeling that something big was about to happen. It was just another day, the kind people forget the moment it ends. He woke up early that morning, the sky still pale and quiet. Life had taught him not to expect much. Every day looked the same to him. Work, responsibilities, silence. He was someone who kept his thoughts to himself, not because he wanted to, but because life had shown him that sharing too much often led to disappointment. He believed good things were rare and short-lived. She woke up in a different place, dealing with a different kind of tiredness. Hers was not from long hours of work alone, but from carrying emotions she never spoke about. People around her knew her as calm and polite, sometimes even cheerful. But beneath that calm surface was a heart that had known loss. Trust broken gently but deeply, and dreams set aside for survival. On that day, neither of them expected anything new. They were just moving through life, doing what needed to be done. Their paths crossed in the most normal setting. No one around noticed. To the world, it meant nothing. To them, at that moment, it also meant nothing. A few words exchanged for reason only, brief eye contact, polite smiles. That was it. If you froze that moment in time, you would never guess what it would slowly grow into. He noticed her only as much as he noticed anyone else. Just another face, another presence. She noticed him the same way. There was nothing striking, nothing dramatic. And that is what made it real. Life continued as usual. Days passed, and yet somehow they kept crossing paths again. Not enough to feel intentional, but enough to feel familiar. A nod became a short greeting. A short greeting turned into simple conversation. Their talks were small at first. About the weather, about work, about things that had no weight. But those light conversations carried something important. They felt easy. There was no pressure to impress, no need to explain too much. He liked that she listened without interrupting. She liked that he spoke only when he meant something. Slowly, without planning it, they began to feel comfortable in each other's presence. Still, neither of them thought of it as anything meaningful. Love was not something either of them believed could arrive quietly. To them, love had always been loud, messy, and painful. What they were feeling seemed too calm to matter. One evening, after a long day, they talked a little longer than usual. Nothing deep, nothing dramatic. Just moments stretched a bit more than they normally did. When they parted, both felt something unfamiliar, a strange sense of comfort mixed with curiosity. It wasn't excitement. It wasn't hope. It was softer than that. He found himself thinking about the conversation later that night. Not replaying it, not analyzing it, just remembering how it made him feel calm. She, too, found her mind drifting back to his quiet expressions and steady voice. It surprised both of them. They tried to ignore it. They told themselves it was nothing. People meet nice people all the time. Life doesn't change because of a few conversations. And yet the feeling stayed. Days turned into weeks. They learned small things about each other. How he preferred silence over noise. How she found peace in simple routines. How both valued honesty, even when it hurt. Neither of them rushed anything. There were no promises, no expectations. Just two people slowly noticing that the world felt a little less heavy when the other was around. There were moments of quiet, understanding that spoke louder than words. Sometimes they would sit nearby without talking, sharing the same space. And somehow, that felt enough. He began to smile more without realizing it. She began to feel lighter, like something heavy inside her chest had loosened just a bit. Still, both carried their pasts carefully. Old wounds whispered warnings. Love, they knew, had a cost. And neither was sure they were ready to pay it again. Yet something was changing. Not loudly. Not suddenly. It was happening in the background, growing slowly. Like a morning light that creeps into a room before you even notice it's there. They didn't call it love. They didn't even call it friendship. It was just something safe, something warm, something gentle, in a life that had mostly been hard. That was how it began. No one clapped. No one noticed. No big moment marked the start. But sometimes, the sweetest stories begin exactly that way, so quietly that you only realize their importance much later. Life did not change overnight after that quiet beginning, but something inside both of them had already shifted. The days still looked the same from the outside, yet they felt different on the inside. A little warmer. A little softer. They began to look for each other without fully admitting it. Not in an obvious way, but in small habits. He would notice the time more, wondering if their paths might cross. She would slow her steps sometimes, without knowing why. When they met, their greetings felt less formal now. The smiles stayed a little longer. The conversations, though still simple, felt more personal. They talked about ordinary things, daily work, small frustrations, tiny joys that others might find boring, but sharing those things felt important to both of them. It was as if they were slowly inviting each other into their daily lives. She mentioned her love for quiet mornings and warm tea. He spoke about how he liked walking alone after a long day to clear his mind. These details, though small, felt meaningful. They were learning who the other really was beneath the surface. There were moments when one of them would say something ordinary, yet it would stay in the other's heart all day. Not because of the words themselves, but because of the care behind them. They still avoided heavy subjects. Painful pasts stayed hidden. Both had learned that opening old wounds too quickly could cause damage. So they moved slowly, listening more than speaking. Over time, laughter entered the space between them. Gentle laughter, the kind that doesn't demand attention. It came naturally, without effort. He noticed how she smiled with her eyes when something amused her. She noticed how his voice softened when he spoke about things he cared about. They did not touch often. A brief handover of something, a short moment of closeness while standing near each other. But even these small moments carried weight. Some evenings they sat nearby without talking much. Silence didn't feel awkward. It felt shared, full, comforting still. Doubt stayed quietly in their minds. He had seen connection fade before. He knew how easily life could pull people apart. She had learned that feelings could be fragile, easily broken by reality. So whenever the moments felt too warm, they pulled back just a little, protecting themselves, being careful. Yet the bond kept growing. One day she did not appear as expected. Hours passed without seeing her. He told himself it was nothing, but he felt unsettled. When she finally returned, tired and distant, he felt relief he did not fully understand. She noticed his concern and felt something tighten in her chest. It was strange, the idea that someone noticed her absence. They spoke briefly that day. But the connection felt deeper than before. Another time he shared something small from his past. Just a quiet moment of honesty. She listened without judgment, without advice. Just presence. That was when trust quietly entered the space between them. They did not name what they were building. Labels felt too heavy. But both knew it mattered. She began to feel safe enough to laugh freely. He began to feel seen in a way he hadn't before. Yet, with that safety came fear. Both sensed that growing closer meant risking loss. There were nights when she lay awake, questioning her own feelings, wondering if she was misreading kindness for something more. There were days when he reminded himself not to hope too much, not to imagine a future that might never happen. But feelings do not always listen to warnings. Time continued its quiet work. They celebrated small wins together, comforted each other during bad days, learned how the other handled stress, silence, joy, and worry. Slowly, they began to matter to each other more than either wanted to admit. When they didn't talk for a day, something felt missing. When they shared a smile, the day felt brighter. Still, neither stepped forward. Life outside their connection remained difficult. Responsibilities pressed in. Expectations from others weighed heavily. Both knew that keeping things simple was safer. Yet love, when it begins to form, doesn't care much about safety. It grows quietly, steadily, and by the end of that season, both understood one truth they could no longer ignore, whatever this was. It was no longer small. It was becoming something that could change everything. By the time they reached this point, both of them knew something real had formed between them, even if neither said it out loud. What started as comfort had slowly turned into attachment, and attachment, when mixed with real life, often brings pain. The change didn't come suddenly. It arrived slowly, through small pressures building day by day. Life began asking more of them. He started facing problems at work that followed him home. Long days turned into longer nights. Responsibility weighed heavier than before, and the quiet walks he once enjoyed now felt rushed. He grew tired in a deeper way, the kind that sleep doesn't fix. She, too, felt pulled in different directions. Family expectations pressed on her gently but constantly. There were duties she could not ignore, and choices she did not feel free to make. The peace she found in their quiet moments became harder to reach at first. They tried to protect what they had. They still met when they could, still talked, still shared silences. But something was different. Their smiles didn't last as long. Their conversations ended sooner than before. Both noticed it. Neither wanted to be the first to mention it. Distance does not always arrive as space. Sometimes it comes as distraction. There were days when one of them would be lost in thought while the other spoke, not because they didn't care, but because life demanded attention elsewhere. Each missed moment felt small. Yet together, they started to hurt. She began to wonder if she was becoming a burden. He started questioning if he had enough strength to offer anything meaningful. One evening, an innocent misunderstanding settled quietly between them. A missed message. A silence felt too long. Words that sounded colder than they were meant to be. Neither reacted strongly. Neither raised their voice. That hurt more, because silence leaves too much space for fear. She sat alone that night, replaying every small moment in her mind, wondering where she had gone wrong. He walked longer than usual, carrying a heaviness he could not explain. Old wounds returned. She remembered times when kindness slowly faded into neglect. He remembered moments when caring had cost him more than he could afford. The next time they met, there was hesitation. They spoke carefully, like people walking over thin ice. Every word felt important. Every pause felt heavy. They wanted to be honest. No, but honesty required courage they weren't sure they had. Days passed like this. Close, but not close enough. Caring, but guarded. Others might not have noticed the difference. To the world, they still looked fine. But between them, something fragile was trembling. Then reality forced the issue. A choice needed to be made. One that affected their time together, their future, and the quiet comfort they had built. It wasn't about love directly, but love stood in the middle of it. Neither wanted to lose what they had. Yet neither knew how to protect it without sacrificing something important from their own life. When they finally spoke clearly about it, the truth came out quietly. They admitted they were scared. Scared of needing someone too much. Scared of giving more than they could handle. Scared of expecting something that might never fully arrive. The conversation was gentle, but painful. There were no accusations. No anger, just sadness. They decided to take a step back. Not because they didn't care, but because caring had started to hurt. The days that followed felt empty in strange ways. She noticed silence, where his presence used to be. He felt the absence in moments he didn't expect, small things. Like wanting to share a thought and realizing there was no one to share it with. They tried to focus on their own lives. She threw herself into responsibilities. He buried himself in work. But quiet has a way of making feelings louder at night. Both found themselves thinking about the same things. Familiar conversations. Shared silences. Comfort without effort. They questioned their choice. Was distance protection, or was it loss in disguise? Neither reached out. Pride played its part. Fear did too. Yet love, when real, does not disappear just because people step away. It waits. And beneath the weight of daily life. Both of them carried the same truth they were not ready to admit. Walking away had not made things easier. It had only shown them how much they truly mattered to each other. The distance they created was meant to bring peace, but it did the opposite. At first, both felt a strange sense of control, as if stepping back had protected them from further hurt. Days passed quietly, and on the surface, life seemed to move normally. But inside, something felt unfinished. He tried to convince himself that this was the right choice. Less attachment meant less pain. More focus on work helped him avoid thinking too much. But there were moments, small and unexpected, when the truth slipped through. He would pause in the middle of his day, thinking of how she would react to something. He would catch himself wanting to share a thought, and remember there was no one listening anymore. She told herself she was stronger than she felt. She leaned into routines, keeping herself busy from morning until night. To others, she looked fine, calmer even. But when the day slowed down, memories appeared quietly. She missed how easily she could be herself when he was around. She missed how safe silence once felt. Neither of them spoke to the other. But both were having the same conversations in their minds. Time did not erase the feelings. It only made them clearer. One afternoon, they crossed paths again, without planning it. It was brief and unexpected. Just a moment in the same space. Their eyes met, and for a second, everything else faded. No words were spoken, but 1,000 emotions moved between them. Longing, regret, comfort, fear, all at once. They went their separate ways. But neither could ignore what that moment awakened. That night, he admitted something to himself he had been avoiding. Distance had not made him lighter. It had made him lonelier. Caring had scared him, yes, but losing connection felt worse. For the first time, he questioned whether protecting himself had been an excuse to avoid risk. She had a similar realization. She understood that the pain she felt wasn't weakness. It was proof that something meaningful had existed. Walking away had not healed her. It had only delayed the truth. Still, reaching out felt terrifying. What if too much time had passed? What if the other no longer cared? What if reopening the door only caused more hurt? Days passed with these thoughts pressing heavily on both hearts. Then, life intervened in a quiet way. He faced a moment when he needed support, even if he didn't like to admit it. Standing alone, he realized how much strength he had drawn from their connection. Strength he had taken for granted. She, too, faced a difficult moment that reminded her how rare it was to feel truly understood. In that moment, she missed not advice, not solutions, but presence. That was when the silence became harder to hold than the fear of speaking. The message was simple, no long explanation, no dramatic words, just honesty, a quiet greeting, a question asking how the other had been. Reading it made her heart race. She read it more than once, afraid to misunderstand. After sitting with it for a while, she replied, carefully, gently. When they met again, it felt different from before. There was no pretending, no rushing back into comfort. Just two people standing face to face with everything unsaid resting between them. The conversation was slow, awkward at times. Honest in ways they hadn't allowed themselves before. They spoke about fear, about how close they had come, and how scared that closeness had made them. They admitted the ways they had pulled away not because of a lack of care, but because of too much of it. There were moments when words failed and silence stepped in. But this time, silence did not hurt. It listened. They did not promise anything big. They did not make plans. For the future, they simply agreed on one thing. What they felt mattered. Enough not to abandon so easily. Choosing each other did not mean perfection. It meant effort. It meant patience. It meant staying even when fear whispered to run as they parted that day. Something had changed. Not everything was fixed, but hope had returned. And sometimes, that is enough to begin again. They did not rush back into anything after that meeting. Both understood that rebuilding something real required patience. So they moved slowly, step by careful step, learning how to stay without losing themselves. They started with something simple. Regular conversations that did not feel forced. Short messages, brief meetings, shared moments that fit into their busy lives instead of taking them over. It felt different from before. Softer, but stronger. They listened more than they spoke. When one of them felt tired, the other did not take it personally. When silence appeared, it was not filled with fear. They were learning that love did not have to demand constant reassurance to survive. Over time, trust grew again, but in a healthier way. Not the blind trust that ignores reality, but the kind that understands limits and accepts effort. He became more open about his struggles, no longer pretending he could handle everything alone. She learned to express her needs, without feeling guilty for having them. There were still difficult days. Life did not suddenly become easy. Responsibilities remained. Pressure still existed, but now they faced it with a quiet understanding that they were not alone. Sometimes, support looked like advice. Other times it looked like silence and presence. Both mattered. They laughed more freely again. The kind of laughter that comes from comfort, not excitement. The kind that feels like home. One evening, sitting together after a long day, they shared memories from their pasts that they once kept hidden. Not to explain themselves, but to understand each other better. There were moments of sadness, moments of gratitude, moments when they realized how far they had come. Neither claimed that love fixed everything. They understood that love was a choice made daily, especially on days when it felt hardest. As weeks turned into months, a quiet rhythm formed in their lives. They learned how to exist together without losing independence, how to care deeply without clinging. People around them noticed a calm change. Not dramatic happiness, not loud celebration, just steadiness. They supported each other's goals. Even when those goals required time apart, growth was no longer seen as a threat. When disagreements happened, they faced them honestly. No disappearing, no silent punishment. Just conversation, even when it felt uncomfortable. Love, they learned, was not about avoiding pain. It was about not allowing fear to control decisions. One day, they realized something quietly beautiful. Their connection no longer felt fragile. It felt rooted. They were no longer afraid of the future. Not because it was certain, but because they trusted themselves to face it together. The love they shared was not loud enough for the world to applaud, but it was deep enough to matter. On ordinary days, they found joy in small routines. Shared meals, walks with no destination, simple conversations about nothing and everything. Love became part of daily life, not something that needed constant attention. They did not promise forever with words. They lived it through actions, through showing up, through choosing kindness, through staying present, looking back. Neither could point to one moment when everything changed. It had been a series of quiet choices, made with care. What began as something unnoticed had grown into something strong, and that was what made it beautiful. Not perfection, not drama, but persistence. In the end, they understood that the sweetest love stories are not the ones that happen without struggle. They are the ones where two people learn, grow, fall, stand back up, and choose each other again. Every single day. Time kept moving, the way it always does, never stopping to ask if people are ready. Days turned into seasons, and seasons slowly became years. What they shared continued to grow, not by dramatic changes, but through steady presence in each other's lives. They learned that love does not stay the same forever. It changes shape. Some days it feels light and easy. Other days it feels heavy, like something you have to carry with both hands. What mattered was that neither of them let go. There were moments when life tested them again. Work became demanding in ways they'd not expected. Plans had to be adjusted. Dreams were delayed. At times, frustration crept in quietly, not toward each other, but toward circumstances they could not control. On those days, patience became their strongest tool. He learned to speak instead of pulling away. Not perfectly, not every time, but more than before. She learned to give space without feeling abandoned. Trusting that silence did not always mean distance. They did not pretend things were perfect. When stress showed up, they named it. When emotions felt unclear, they slowed down and tried to understand. Instead of reacting, Sometimes they failed. Sometimes words came out wrong. Sometimes tiredness made them less kind than they wanted to be, but apologies came faster now. Listening came easier. They had learned that winning an argument was never as important as protecting the bond. As life moved forward, responsibilities grew. Decisions became more serious. Their connection was no longer just about feelings, but about building something stable together. They spoke about the future openly, not with big promises, but with honesty. What they wanted, what they feared, what they were willing to work for. There were moments when doubts returned. Could they really keep choosing each other through everything life might bring? Each time that question appeared, it was answered not with words, but with actions. Through showing up on hard days, through staying present when it was easier to escape, through holding space for each other's worries without turning them into problems. They supported growth. Even when growth meant change, they learned that love does not mean it's always being the center of someone's world. It means being a safe place to return to. They created routines that belonged only to them, simple habits that grounded them when everything else felt unsure. These routines became small anchors, reminders of how far they had come. There were moments of quiet joy that felt more meaningful than any celebration. Sitting together at the end of a long day, sharing a meal they both enjoyed, talking about nothing important at all, they also faced moments of deep reflection. They looked back at who they were when they first met. Two people guarded by past pain, unsure of what was safe to feel. They smiled at how careful they had been, not with regret, but with appreciation, because that careful beginning had taught them how to value what they built. Life continued to place challenges in front of them, as it does for everyone. Losses happened. Disappointments arrived. The world did not become kinder just because they found love, but love made it easier to stand back up when one of them felt weak. The other became strong. When both felt tired, they rested together. Without judgment, they learned that being partners did not mean fixing each other. It meant walking side by side as time went on. Their story remained mostly unseen by others. There were no grand announcements, no loud moments for people to admire, and that was fine, because what they shared was not meant for an audience. It was meant for them. One day, during a quiet moment, they realized something important. The fear that once controlled them no longer had the same power. They still respected it, but they did not let it decide for them anymore. Love had taught them how to be brave and small. Steady ways, looking at each other, did not see perfection. They saw effort, they saw growth, they saw two people who kept choosing, even when it was hard. The story that began without anyone noticing had become a part of who they were, and that is how the sweetest love. Stories last not by being loud, but by being real, by continuing, by choosing each other quietly, again and again. As life goes on, life reached a stage where things felt settled, but not still. They had built something steady, yet new seasons brought new lessons. Love did not stop teaching them just because they had grown comfortable. There came a time when change knocked again, quietly but firmly. Opportunities appeared that required difficult choices, the kind that forced people to look closely at what truly matters. He was offered a chance that could change his path. It meant growth, stability, and a future he had once only imagined. But it also meant long hours and less time together. It meant adjusting routines they had carefully built. She listened as he spoke about it, noticing the mix of excitement and worry in his voice. She did not interrupt. She understood how important it was for him to feel supported, not judged. Inside, she struggled. She wanted to encourage him, but fear whispered questions she did not want to hear. Would distance slowly return? Would old patterns surface again? Instead of hiding those thoughts, she chose honesty. She spoke calmly about her fears, not as demands, but as truths. He listened just as carefully. He reassured her not with promises, but with understanding. They decided together, not based on fear. Not based on pressure, but on trust. Adjusting was not easy. Early days were filled with tired conversations and missed moments. They felt the strain. But they did not turn away from it. They learned how to stay connected. Even when physically apart, short messages carried warmth. Quick calls reminded them they were thinking of each other. When doubts appeared, they faced them openly. Growth did not pull them apart. It shaped them. There were days when exhaustion tested their patience. On those days, they reminded each other why they started. Not with grand words, but with small gestures. A thoughtful note, a simple check-in, a moment of listening without advice. Love deepened through effort. They began to understand something new. Love is not just surviving hardship together. It is allowing each other to grow without fear of being left behind. As time passed, balance returned. Routine shifted, but connection remained. They celebrated progress, not perfection. They allowed room for mistakes. They gave grace when stress made one quieter than usual. One quiet evening, they reflected on how far they had come. From two guarded people, avoiding risk, to partners facing change hand in hand, they smiled at the thought, not proudly, but gratefully. The world outside continued its noise and rushed inside their connection. There was calm. They realized that love had become something dependable, something they could lean on while reaching for more. There was no fear of losing each other in success or struggle, because they had learned how to stay present. As days unfolded, their story proved a simple truth. Love does not fade when it is nurtured. It adapts. It strengthens. It grows alongside the people living it. And so they continued, not chasing perfection, but choosing togetherness again, and again, and again. By this point in their journey, love had stopped feeling like something fragile. It was no longer something they worried might break with the wrong word or a difficult day. Instead, it had become part of who they were. Woven quietly into their lives, they reached a season where reflection came naturally. Not because they were unhappy, but because life had slowed just enough to allow them to look back. Sitting together during quiet moments, they sometimes spoke about the past, not with sadness, but with understanding. They remembered how guarded they once were, how carefully they had, and measured every feeling, how afraid they had been of needing someone now. That fear felt distant, not gone completely, but softened. They had learned that love did not mean losing oneself. It meant becoming more honest, more patient, more present. Small challenges still appeared. Misunderstandings happened. Stress visited when least expected. The difference now was how they responded. Instead of turning inward, they turned toward each other when frustration appeared. They talked before it grew heavy. When one felt overwhelmed, the other adjusted without being asked. They had learned the rhythm of each other's emotions. They also learned when to step back. Love, they discovered, was knowing when to hold close and when to give space. There were evenings when they shared hopes about the future, not as fixed plans, but gentle ideas, where they wanted to be, what kind of life felt meaningful, how they wanted to grow, both together and individually. They no longer feared those conversations. They trusted that honesty would not push them apart. Time passed quietly, marked not by milestones, but by consistency, the kind that builds something strong without drawing attention. They faced moments when the world felt uncertain. News, responsibilities, changes beyond their control. In those moments, they found comfort not in big gestures, but in familiarity, a shared look, a calm voice, a simple reminder that they were not facing things alone. Others sometimes commented on the peace between them. They did not always understand how it was built. From the outside, it looked effortless. It was not. It was earned through choosing communication over silence, through choosing patience over pride, through choosing care. Even on tired days, they began to understand something deeply. Important love is not proven in perfect moments. It is proven in ordinary ones. When nothing Exciting is happening when routine takes over. When staying requires intention. They stayed. They continued to show up in small, meaningful ways. A kind word, a listening ear, a shared responsibility. They allowed themselves to change. They accepted that growth might shift priorities. And they did not fear that shift because their bond was no longer built on sameness. It was built on respect. As another season passed, they felt a quiet confidence settle between them. Not the confidence that announces itself, but the kind that brings peace. They were no longer proving anything to themselves or anyone else. They simply were, in moments alone. Each reflected on how unexpected this love had been, how it arrived without force, without drama, without promise, and how it stayed. That realization filled them with gratitude, not for a perfect story, but for a real one. They knew challenges would continue to come. Life always brings them. But they also knew something else. They had learned how to face life together, and that knowledge carried them forward, quietly, steadily, with love that did not need to be loud to last as time went on. Something subtle began to change in the way they saw themselves. Love had shaped them quietly, without demanding attention. It had softened sharp edges and strengthened fragile parts they once tried to hide. They started noticing how their choices were different now. Not because they were controlled by love, but because love had given them clarity. They thought more carefully. They spoke more gently. They paused before reacting. The world around them kept moving fast, filled with noise and opinions. Yet within their shared life, there was a steady calm. Not silence, but balance. They understood each other in a way that did not need constant explanation. When one spoke less, the other listened more. When one felt unsure, the other offered reassurance, not pressure. They had learned how to protect what they shared without closing themselves off from the world. There were days when they helped others simply by being themselves. Friends noticed their patience. Family felt their steadiness. Without trying to teach lessons, they became an example of what care and consistency could look like. They never claimed to have all the answers. They simply showed what was possible when two people chose respect again and again, sometimes. During long walks or quiet evenings, they talked about meaning, about what truly lasts when excitement fades, about what kind of life feels honest. Those conversations did not always lead to conclusions, but they created connection. They found purpose, not only in dreams, but in presence. They realized something important. Love was no longer just something that belonged to them. It influenced how they treated everyone else. Kindness became easier. Patience became natural. Forgiveness came faster. They were still imperfect. They still made mistakes. But mistakes no longer defined them. Growth did. One day, while reflecting quietly, they both understood how rare their journey had been. Not because it was free from hardship, but because it was built with intention. They had faced fear instead of running from it. They had stayed, and leaving felt simpler. They had chosen understanding over pride. That realization brought humility. Not pride, they felt grateful. Not for luck, but for effort. As another chapter of life unfolded, they felt prepared. Not protected from pain, but equipped to face it together. They stopped asking whether love would last. They focused instead on how to live it well. Ordinary days continued to hold meaning. Shared responsibilities, simple routines, quiet appreciation. They no longer needed excitement to feel alive. Consistency had become its own joy. In moments alone, each carried the same thought. What they had built was not something found, it was something made, and that made it precious. They understood. Now that the most beautiful love stories do not try to impress, they endure, they grow, they quietly make life better as they moved forward, hand in hand. Their story continued without fanfare. No announcement marked it. No ending closed it. Because real love does not end. It simply keeps going. One thoughtful day at a time. Together.